My dad is famous for making very calm, cutting remarks at people where he doesn't seem like he's being aggressive, but he's cutting you down a lot. When he caught cancer and was going through treatment, that definitely abated a lot. And I remember I was driving to one of his chemotherapy sessions and I was like, you've been much nicer. I just feel like your perspective has changed. And he was like, it actually hasn't changed, but the chemo has affected my brain. And when the comeback comes to my head, that moment is already past. And so it's like, I can't use it anymore.
Welcome to the Will and Lee Show.
Hi, this is Will. And as always, I have my co-hosts here with me today, Lee Chang and Andrew Su.
What's up, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
So for the last year, I've been spending a lot of time pledging this organization called FF. I met today's guest, Chris Teng Balmaseda, because we both pledged FF here in LA together. Chris is one of the most interesting people I've got to know. He's currently a venture partner at Infinio Capital as an early stage SpaceTech investor, with the goal of sending the first Taiwanese astronaut into space. He's the president-elect of Alhambra Chamber of Commerce, board member of Taiwan Center Foundation of Greater Los Angeles, board member of Taiwan United Fund, board member of Taiwanese American Film Festival, president of Taiwanese American Professional Los Angeles, and the associate advisor of the Overseas Community Affairs Council of the Republic of China. Chris started out as a researcher studying molecular and cell biology at UC Berkeley and getting his master's in biochemistry and molecular biophysics at Caltech. Instead of going into research, he joined a Taiwanese startup during the tech boom of the early 2000s and built their US office, then started his own company in 2009. Chris is also the most connected person I've ever met. I don't know how he does it. It's incredible. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thank you for having me. Really excited to join this conversation.
So usually you're always out getting to know people, but today you have some time for us because you're in Taiwan, right?
Yeah, I'm in a 2-week quarantine. I think I have 5 more days. So I'm a captive audience. I can go on for the next, 10 hours if you want. For people that know me, I'm never home. I only go home to sleep. I just like to always be out and about meeting people. And even doing this podcast, I much prefer to do it in person. I just vibe off with people and it's hard to do over virtual, but at least I'm not alone here in quarantine. My wife is with me and yeah, it's going well.
Tell us a little bit about quarantine. How does quarantine work in Taiwan?
So I got married in February of 2020. And starting in March, when the pandemic really took off in the world, they shut down the borders. The only people allowed in Taiwan are permanent residents and citizens. And when anyone that enters other than government officials, they have to quarantine for 2 weeks. This is a hard quarantine. You can't leave. This is my 4th time doing it. The first 3 times I did it at home, which is much easier. Since Delta started last May, now we are required to do it in a hotel. So this is my first time doing a hotel. It's really hard to stay in a hotel room without leaving. You're talking about like 500 square feet. There's no openable windows and you're just there all the time. And nothing in your room can leave. Like most of your garbage is collected like once a week. You can't change towels. You can't change sheets. And so I was trying to find a big place, but you also have to pay for it. And so I'm a, what they call CP value type person in Taiwan, which means I always look for good cost performance. And so a friend of mine told me, if you're outside of Taipei, the hotels are much cheaper and much bigger. I kicked that up a notch. And right now I'm at what's called a car hotel. And this is kind of a level up of a love hotel, which you see in Taiwan. These things you can usually rent for 4 hours at a time, but for COVID quarantine, they've opened it up to 2-week stays. And so right behind me, there's actually a big hot tub right there. Listeners can't see it, but over here, this is called an octopus chair. That's a chair. You notice it has stirrups. Some of the rooms have stripper poles. So right here, I have a light because the only lighting in this room is mood lighting. It's really dark and it's just for getting it on and getting home. And then downstairs, there's actually a garage, a huge garage that opens up. And so I can get fresh air, hang out down there, work out. And that's so that you can enter this room without being seen. Like you check in a toll booth, you open your window about an inch, they slide the key into your car. No one sees your face. It's all paid in cash. They really got the system down here. This is only the second time I've stayed at one, and it's always been with my wife. And that's my story.
Disclaimer, very important.
So you've been in quarantine multiple times. You said 4 times. Both you and Lee were in quarantine in Taiwan during the Renaissance of Taiwan. There was a lot going on. Can you describe that time for me?
Oh, that was an amazing time. Lee experienced it. And what happened was the United States and a lot of countries around the world shut down. You couldn't go outside. I mean, you were free to go outside, but there was nowhere to go. Restaurants you couldn't eat at. There's no bars. You can't hang out with people. After my wedding, I actually went back for a couple of weeks. And yeah, my friends didn't want to see me and my wife didn't come back with me. So it's really lonely. So I decided to come to Taiwan and join my wife. And along with me were about 2,000 expats, mostly Taiwanese Americans, but also non-Taiwanese that came to Taiwan during COVID. And they were all eager to do something. They'd been locked up for a month or 2 months. And the government here was just really generous. There is a place in Taipei called Taipei Tech Arena or TTA, Taiwan Tech Arena, one of those two. And it's hosted by the Ministry of Science and Technology. And they basically gave all these expats, especially the ones in technology, free space for us to hang out, share ideas with each other, and also help mentor the local startup teams. And so I got this desk. To my left was Steve Chen, the founder of YouTube. Patrick Lee, the founder of Rotten Tomatoes, was there. Kai Huang, the founder of Guitar Hero, was there. Jameson Shu was just across from me. All of these really famous tech entrepreneurs, Taiwanese American, they're really successful. And we're just hanging out in the same room. These were not my friends before, but from this experience, we all got really close. And this was 100% attributed to the generosity of the government, giving us this space and giving us just a lot of room to do whatever we wanted. And it's been a great experience. I met all of these awesome, amazing people that I would never have met. And okay, I know COVID was pretty terrible for everybody. I don't discount that, but 2020 for me and a lot of the people that came was a pretty remarkable experience in Taiwan. And I want to say that with all respect to the people who suffered in 2020, including my own family and friends.
Did you find out about the program organically, just through friends, as you were looking for something to do?
Just by chance, I happened to live 2 blocks away from TTA. And TTA is housed inside Taipei Arena. So it's not some small little office building. It is a huge complex that they hold concerts there. It's gigantic and it looks awesome. And one day I was going to a birthday party of one of the bridesmaids for my wedding, Blair. I think you guys, I'm pretty sure Lee knows her. And we were at a new restaurant called Mama-san. And I was just chatting with people and then this guy came in and a lot of the people at the birthday knew him. And I was just chatting. He's like, oh, I'm checking it out. I heard it's new. I know one of the owners. And then my wife comes into the conversations like, you know, that's Steve Chen, right? And I was like, what? Really? It was the founder of YouTube I was chatting with. He meant to just come in for 10 minutes, but we struck up a conversation. I got to know him better as the year went on. And one day he just told me, he's like, hey, do you want to get this black card? It's for expats that came to Taiwan. It gives you like 24-hour full access to TTA. I can help you apply for one. And before I knew it, I had this black card and it gave me full access. And so when I got that access, I just kept meeting more and more people. And so that's how I happened upon it. It was all Steve Chen, and this program was launched by the Ministry of Science and Technology around the time that I came to Taiwan.
That's so cool. How did your wife already know it was Steve Chen?
I think she had overheard other people talking. I mean, I know what he looks like, but only on TV and probably like 20 years ago. I didn't know how he looks like today.
So you're currently a venture partner at Infinio Capital. Was that while you were at Taiwan or was that before?
That was about a year before. Long story short, I had been in my own startup for about 10 years, more than 10 years. And it's no longer a startup at that point, but it was just getting repetitive and monotonous. And I've always been the type that going to Caltech and Berkeley, I've always been doing research at the cutting edge. And I was at basically the repetitive, very not interesting portion of my company. And I was just looking for other things to do. I'm 45 years old. At the time I made this pivot, 42, 43. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to pivot many more times in my career, especially if I'm getting married soon. So I decided to just change. And just by chance, I happened to meet this venture capital firm. I got to know them and there was a lot of alignment and I joined them.
Tell us
Okay.
a little bit about what is it that you do?
So that laundry list of organizations you read out pretty much shows I'm very involved in the community, both in the mainstream with the Alhambra Chamber of Commerce and with a lot of Taiwanese organizations. And a lot of people ask me why I dedicate so much time in these endeavors. And a couple of things, I've always tried to be involved in the community somewhat. One of my best friends, actually the best man in my wedding, his little sister has Down syndrome. And so we've always participated in Special Olympics events. And even when I was younger, my dad was a rehab doctor for paraplegics. I would take paraplegics whitewater rafting, which is a very scary experience, but really fulfilling. And my dad always taught me to really find ways to give back. And so it's always been a part of my life. Fast forward many years later, and my wife decided, or didn't decide, she was forced to move back to Taiwan for a bit because her mom was ill, terminal illness. And I just encouraged her, forget everything. The first year that I was with my wife, my dad also came down with a terminal illness. So I knew exactly how it felt like. I encouraged her to leave, but I was left with nothing to do. Probably a little too old to be out partying with my friends who all have kids. So I just got very involved in the community. I was already a member of the Chamber of Commerce, but I became more involved and just started filling my free time with community service and things like that. I participated in some commission hearings in Alhambra at city council meetings. And I used to think that local government was just rubber stamp, small issues. Do we give a permit to this foot massage place? Yeah, nothing important. But after participating, I found out that a lot of decisions are made by people that don't really represent the community. Not Alhambra specifically, but a lot of communities, they have no Asian American or Asian representation at all in their local governments, even if their populations are like 50% Asian. And that really was eye-opening for me. I decided to make it my personal goal to help represent APIs in the local community. A little of that's probably a residual of going to Berkeley, where we get really active and really into different movements. From there, I started participating in more Taiwanese organizations, mostly because I just feel Taiwan is a wonderful place. My wife grew up here. The people are kind, but their way of life, their democracy, everything about them is threatened on a daily basis. And, there's always this mistake that people make in the mainstream that, oh, Taiwan, Thailand, they don't know the difference. A lot of even government officials don't know anything about Taiwan. Luckily, it's gotten better in the last couple of years, but I've made it my personal quest to bring awareness to Taiwan's issues and let people know that we're around and that we're here to help, and pretty much go out of my way to represent Taiwan in a lot of issues. And that's why I got very involved in different organizations. When you get involved in one, you start getting pulled into other ones, and I'm easy to sucker in to help. So here I am. Now to the Infinio part. At that point in my career, probably a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was getting really bored of my company. There wasn't much upside anymore. It was really dull. I want to do something else. I started attending a lot of startup meets and going into conferences and shows just to get reacquainted with what's going on. My background is in research in biophysics, biochemistry. I quickly found out that what used to take me, I did my undergraduate research in DNA sequencing. What used to take billions of dollars and 2 years of research from 50 different universities can now be done in an afternoon, maybe a couple hours by one person for like $1,000. So I'm way behind in the biotech, like just eons behind in the technology. So I started looking at tech and the fact that I don't really understand why TikTok is popular or how to use Spotify. I'm not the target audience anymore in that industry. So it's like, I can't do that. There's no way. I'll be severely handicapped. And so I was looking around what to do. And there was this guy from Infinio Capital that just kept showing up at different Taiwan related events, especially with the Ministry of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Economic Affairs. And we got to talking. I was telling him I'm looking to do something new, but I want it to be something Taiwan related, not just so I can come here and go to core and hang out with friends, but really to do something to move the needle. In the past, I'd helped organize different events. Even President Tsai came to a film festival I helped organize. But while these are really important for soft power, I wanted to do something that really moved the needle. Something I feel like I'm in my mid 40s now. A lot of my colleagues from Caltech have done like amazing things. Some of the professors have gone on to win Nobel Prizes. And I was like, I got to do something on that level. Infinio Capital came into my life. They told me they're very focused on trying to help level up Taiwan to new industries. Taiwan is known for semiconductors, for hardware. Lee was at Foxconn, which is probably one of the most famous companies from Taiwan. But they're just known for OEM manufacturing. A generation before that was textiles, petrochemicals. So we were thinking about what's next. And so we came up with this thesis. We need something that has very high margins, can leverage what Taiwan is good at, which is precision manufacturing, high tech, and cost down. They're kings of costing down. And so what really made sense to us was aerospace. So that is not only just airplanes and rockets and satellites, but also space related technologies. So communications, you can imagine once we have, let's say, a presence on the moon, you're going to need things to help monitor your healthcare because there's no hospitals on the moon. You need to be able to extract water and resources from the ground, harness energy, things like that. And so we came up with this thesis that we can leverage Taiwan's strengths and put it into a new industry and find the niches where they would excel. And so right now, Taiwan is the number one semiconductor manufacturer in the world. They are light years ahead of everybody. And they also make the biggest margins. It'll be very difficult for anyone to catch up. And we want to find that specific niche in another industry so that there's another industry to lean on for Taiwan. At the same time, we want to also create jobs. There's a lot of great engineers here, even US educated ones. And we felt like this thesis would really work. At Infinio Capital, I'm a venture partner, kind of an ambiguous term. I've helped do a lot of business development, a lot of interactions with possible investors, fundraising, things like that. We're currently raising our second fund. And yeah, it's been a great ride. And one amazing thing about Taiwan that I don't have in the United States, at least not yet, maybe one day, is it is not that difficult to get a relationship or a meeting with, let's say, the Minister of Economics, the Minister of Science and Technology. We have a call with the head of NSPO, which is the NASA of Taiwan, very frequently. And then also titans of industry here. I've met quite a lot of them. There's no way I would have been able to contact Mayor Pete to talk about transportation in the United States. It's just not going to happen where I'm at right now. And also the Taiwan government has been very supportive of us in every way possible, wanting to find some way to really launch this new endeavor, to the point that they even earmarked $900 million towards developing the space industry in Taiwan. That's basically what I do.
So if those companies don't already exist, are you also thinking about either acquiring and bringing in talent or setting up an incubator?
How are you? We invest in startups in the traditional sense where they're looking for money. There's an Israeli company called Ramon Space, which we're talking to right now. They're trying to build space computers. I don't know if you know this, but satellites and things in space just send raw data down to Earth, zeros and ones, and that data is analyzed when it gets on Earth. There's no computing that goes on in space, or barely any. And so they're trying to build space hardened processors, memory, hard drives, and infrastructure, basically put a server in space so that you could have cloud computing from the sky. This goes along with the advantages of edge computing. If you can do the computing up in the sky, it'll save you a lot of time because data transmission of raw data takes a very long time, even with LEO satellites, which are much closer. And so we do invest or planning to invest in startup companies like that around Series A. But we also are looking to bring large companies, maybe a Raytheon or Airbus or Boeing to Taiwan to work with Taiwanese manufacturers, companies like Foxconn or Woodstrom or things like that, or not even just computer companies, but fabrication companies, materials companies, machining companies to build parts for the space industry. And these will be JVs, not exactly startups, but at least they have POs and revenue in hand. And Lee will probably attest to this. Getting startups funded in Taiwan is not the same as Silicon Valley whatsoever. For people to invest, you need to show revenue. They want solid POs. They are very risk adverse in Taiwan, extremely risk averse. And so actually next week, we're opening a new office at TTA South, which is in Tainan, right next to the HSR. I was actually at the grand opening for it last year or earlier this year. And so we've rented some office space and we're going to be housing teams down there to explore. This is just an example. This is not for sure, but maybe get some teams from Foxconn or Wistrom, Acer, and get them to do some feasibility studies with either a startup like Ramon Space or Nano Avionics, which is a Lithuanian company, and see what can we build together, what can we do, and see what interesting things come from that. And so the government will support us with feasibility study funding. The companies will dedicate some resources. And if something comes out of it, maybe a JV, maybe a startup that specializes in the specific space technology that they're trying to develop. And the hope one day is Taiwan finds its niche, whether it's components, subsystems, or full systems in a specific area, maybe satellites, maybe some components on rockets like the Raptor engine or something like that. Right now, they're doing pretty well. They're building for SpaceX's Starlink program. All of the receivers are being built in Taiwan. And so we really think that there's an opening there. And if we don't capture it soon, it'll go to another country. And this is really an area that Taiwanese companies need to go to. The margins are only shrinking in consumer electronics, and they don't have economies of scale like China. They don't have the government policies and support. And not just China, there's Korea, Japan, emerging economies like Thailand, Vietnam. And they really need to find a niche where they can go to. And we really feel like the aerospace is. And on top of that, it is not legal for aerospace companies to work with China or Russia. And so this is a protected industry, and Taiwan can really go into this industry and feel confident that they can get high margins and long-term, decades-long contracts. Yeah.
So is the strategy effectively invest in startups working in aerospace and then form joint ventures to actually bring the manufacturing or prove out the manufacturing in Taiwan?
Yeah, it really depends on the opportunity. If it is a startup, a lot of startups have ideas, they have designs that they can't build. My example, Ramon Space, they're already working with TSMC, UMC. They have an investment from UMC, but they don't have a fab. They don't build their own computer. They don't build their own satellite. So at some point, either for the POC or for mass production, they're going to need to work with a company that will either be direct or maybe forming some sort of JV. Because obviously companies don't just want to build, they want to acquire technology and know-how, either under license or some joint research project. And so, yes, of course, VC, at the end of the day, we want to make money, but part of our thesis is also helping to develop the Taiwanese industry and economy.
What about, I was asking about the incubator because I was curious growing the, I guess, like idea space in Taiwan. So it wouldn't be a company in another country. You could both fund or grow the idea and form a joint venture. Is that something y'all think about, or is that something?
So
you think about?
the actual name was it Infinio Venture Space Studio. It is basically for developing ideas and getting the teams together to see what's technically possible and to see if there's a right fit. Once that's done, it'll be up to the companies on what they want to do and if they want to include Infinio along for the ride. But what we found out is communication between global, especially Western companies and Taiwanese companies is not straightforward. And also aerospace, and especially space, it can only go forward with government support. Almost every single company, SpaceX, their money almost all from government launches and government research grants. They just got awarded the human moon lander. That's like $2 billion, which they got from that competition with Amazon. Their research in space is extremely expensive. Space is expensive and hard. And so a foreign company working with Taiwan, very difficult. Taiwan working with US government contractors, also very difficult. So we feel like we definitely have a niche there.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining.
Sorry, I have to reply my quarantine.
Oh yeah, no problem. Take your time.
I just got the text. It came 30 minutes ago. They just called me, but I replied.
That's funny. There was one time when I was doing home quarantine, my phone died because I was using a separate phone with the Taiwan SIM. So I didn't reply for like almost 18 hours. And so they were close to showing up and knocking on my door. But luckily, they called my dad and I left his number. So they're able to reach me. I called them back.
What are they looking for when they text you?
Make sure you're still
Have a fever, runny nose, stuffy nose, cough, breathing difficulties, loss of taste, diarrhea, malaise, or limb weakness.
Do they text you and Antonia separately?
They text us separately, but in the past, I was the only one in quarantine and I didn't answer my phone. So when COVID first happened, there was no texting. It was only the local police precinct will call you. And sometimes I didn't answer because I was sleeping or whatever. And they called her right away. And I think one time they actually came to the house. So you can't get away.
You're Filipino-Chinese, so your family's not from Taiwan. You've actually
No.
learned Chinese. You married a Taiwanese American. You spend a lot of time in Taiwan. You're doing a lot of things pushing Taiwan forward economically. How did you get there? And number two is how did you assimilate yourself into Taiwanese culture?
Well, it's complicated. My mom's side and my dad's side, their families immigrated from China. My dad's side a very long time ago, 1800s, and my mom's side in the 1920s. My mom's side left during the Republican era, around Sun Yat-sen era, and left for the Philippines. And in those times, nationalities and what you look like and what your parents are, they were not different. It is completely ridiculous in that time to be. There's no concept of naturalizing into a citizenship. You are what you are. A lot of my mom's family, they did maintain Republic of China passports, which is essentially Taiwan now. There are ties in that way where a lot of my family has Taiwan passports. And they also speak Hokkien, which is very, very similar to Taiwanese. And so when I was in college, first of all, I grew up in Ohio, where there's actually no Asian people except my brothers. And then all the people whose parents worked at the Honda factory in Marysville, Ohio. That was like all the Asians. When I went to college in Berkeley, I guess I found the most commonality with, and just by chance, I had a lot of Taiwanese friends. They're my roommates. They were the people I hung out with on a day-to-day basis. And I just felt more of a connection with them than other cultures, we'll say. And I never got to hang out with Asians before growing up in Ohio. I did grow up a little in Toronto, which has a ton of Asians, but I was too young to remember. And then, I went to high school in Virginia. There's no Asian people there. And so I kind of got excited being around a lot of them. And because they were Taiwanese, I got to really go in deep with their culture. And I'm also mixed Filipino. My parents have more of a Filipino on my dad's side or a Chinese Filipino upbringing on my mom's side. And it's kind of a different culture than let's say your typical Filipino American. I know there's a few FF members who are Chinese Filipino, and they can attest to this. I think Filipino-Chinese are some of the most racist people I've ever met in my life. And not all of them, of course, but a lot of them stress knowing your Chinese identity. You're definitely not Filipino. Do not marry a Filipino. You need to know where your ancestors are from. You need to speak the language. I think my interest in Taiwan is a combination of wanting to know some Asian culture, having a lot of friends that came from Taiwan, having some connection through overseas Republic of China citizens, common language, similar foods. So Chinese, Filipino food, Filipino-Chinese food is similar to Taiwanese food in some ways. And yeah, it just turned out that way. Also, I had a lot of Taiwanese ex-girlfriends.
Wait,
I got to know the
quickly,
culture.
What about your parents? You mentioned your dad is multiple generations in, right? Like his ancestors
Yeah.
moved pretty early. And so how did they identify themselves?
Not unlike many countries. And my dad is definitely mixed with Filipino blood too. After many generations, you just become local and you adopt local names and customs. I would say probably culturally, my dad's side is very Filipino. On the opposite side, my mom's side, my mom has 8 brothers and sisters, and she's more in the middle. And around her era of going to around middle school, high school, the Philippines changed their policy. Before, Chinese people were left to govern themselves. They had their own school system. They did their own thing. They could never become citizens. But Ferdinand Marcos, who ironically is ethnically Chinese, wanted to Filipinize everybody that was in the Philippines. And so everyone that grew up before a certain time period that was Chinese, Filipino-Chinese, they tended to speak Hokkien, carry more Chinese culture, and identify more as Chinese. The government policies after Marcos banned teaching more than 10% of your program in a different language. You had to learn a lot of Philippine history, got rid of a lot of the independence of the Chinese school system, which were run from Taiwan, and allowed Chinese people to become Filipino citizens. And so my mom's family, probably everyone older than her, are probably more Chinese, and everyone younger than her are more Filipino Chinese. I mean, I wouldn't say that they're full culturally Filipino either, but my mom is in the middle. She can somewhat speak Chinese and she identifies somewhere in the middle there.
Got it. That's interesting because I think you see the same patterns throughout other Asian countries as well, like East Asia as well. You look at Japan, Korea. I mean, Taiwan to an extent, it's complicated. It's not all the same, but there's like this force that's driving more nationalism and trying to separate themselves from the original Chinese influence, right?
Most Indonesian Chinese I know don't speak Chinese anymore. And I have some very good friends that are, and yeah, maybe even their parents don't speak Chinese anymore. Malaysia and Singapore are kind of unique where the ethnic Chinese people there either speak Hokkien or Hakka or Mandarin. They've been able to retain their identity. But for the most part, I would say diaspora Chinese everywhere else, they just adopt the local custom.
Yeah. Chris, can you share a bit with us some of the characteristics of Filipino culture? Like I have some Filipino friends, but I'd love to know from your point of view, what are like the similarities or differences perhaps to Taiwanese Americans? What are some like unique characteristics from your family that you observed growing up?
I don't see that many. I mean, there's of course the filial piety, the respect your elders aspect. I think most Asian countries, probably most countries in the world have that. I did have extreme, okay, they'll probably never hear this. I did have pretty extreme tiger parents, maybe not to the extreme of Jill, but definitely they drove us hard. And so I think that is something that's just ingrained in every Asian community.
Let's talk about your parents a little bit. Both your parents graduated high school at 16 years old, went to the top schools in the Philippines. Your father went on to do his medical residency at Harvard, while your mom finished 2 master's degree. When you talk about tiger parents, you had real tiger parents.
Yeah. My mom probably would, she's a physical therapist, but she probably would have been a doctor too, but I guess it didn't fit my dad's gender role notions. So, so they were definitely overachievers. While my dad had 8 siblings, he was the only boy. He had 2 older brothers, but they both passed away during World War II at very young ages. And so not only was he very smart, he was extremely coddled. And because my grandparents had lost 2 previous sons, he was like the golden boy. Everyone just did what he said and accommodated his ego and whatever he wanted to do. He did definitely excel in school and accomplish a lot of things and eventually immigrated to the United States. My mom also comes from a very tiger family, just very driven and academically. I mean, I feel like I did okay, but if my parents had the same start that I had, their drive probably would have well exceeded what I was able to do here. And they don't let us forget that. My dad would be like, I came from the Philippines. My mom was a school teacher and I eventually did a residency at Harvard. What is your excuse? I'm just like, well, it was a different time. That's all I can say.
Well, I mean, you got to do bad. You went to Berkeley and then Caltech, right? I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But, they're, to our face, they're never satisfied. When I'm not there, they're totally bragging to their friends, I'm sure. But I think it's a very Asian thing to not let your kids know that you're overly or too proud of them. Like, they want you to keep striving and attaining. And so I've always felt I have no idea how my parents could have ever, and this is pre-internet, immigrated to another country. They did know English, so they had that, but it's not easy. I'm just here. I've been living in Taiwan. It's pretty hard. And I have a Google Translate. I have a lot of crutches to lean on. And I have family here. I don't know how our parents came to the United States with no family, no friends, no language, and just thrive. That's just amazing to me. I got to hand it off. And so I always keep that in mind. Whatever was hard for me, it was way harder for my parents.
You say you studied cellular and molecular biology, undergrad. Is that right?
Yeah, molecular and cell biology, focusing on immunology.
And is that an influence from your parents?
Oh yeah, my dad was a doctor, a physician, and then later on a medical school professor at Ohio State. Imagine how many Asian American parents tell their kids to be doctors. Now imagine your dad's a doctor. I always expected that I would become a doctor. And my mom's also in healthcare. All their friends are doctors. My dad was in a medical fraternity. I always felt like that was gonna be my life.
Yeah.
But I got really into the research when I was an undergrad. And I had this conversation with my dad once. I heard it somewhere else, but basically like doctors help people one at a time. And when you're a scientist, you can help millions of people at a time, kind of like these scientists coming up with the vaccines for COVID. And so I thought this is going to be even more impactful, even more meaningful, but it is infinitely harder. And so I definitely thought I would end up in some sort of medical related field.
You studied molecular and cellular biology, and then did research at Caltech, but then you co-founded 2 tech companies. Can you walk us through how did you go from biology, like science research, to co-founding tech companies? What led you down that path?
I graduated during the dot-com bubble. I graduated in 1999. Everything is blowing up. At the time, we were using things like Eudora. We're still on Windows XP, and tech just looked very attractive to me. Even when I was studying all of the molecular biology, biophysics, I was living during the tech boom when everything that we see today was just a startup. Google was new. We were using Friendster, not Facebook or MySpace. It was just really exciting. That's why I went in the tech direction, but I don't have a tech background, especially in Taiwan or any Asian country. For some reason, if you have a very good background, like I went to Caltech, they probably think I know something about aerospace, which I don't. It's all self-taught. I mean, in my defense, Elon Musk also didn't go to school for aerospace, but he knows a lot. I try to read up on it, try to understand it, but there's a lot of credibility that comes with having very prestigious universities in your resume. And so I'm not blind to that. I leverage that. That's how I got a job in senior management at a Taiwanese company. It's like, yeah, I went to Caltech. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'll do it.
But, going to those schools definitely taught me critical thinking, problem solving. I still remember sitting in my lab, staring at a chalkboard, not a whiteboard, a chalkboard, trying to figure out a problem, just staring at equations and problems for like hours on end. So, it's not like I don't have any training. The critical thinking, the scientific method definitely helps me in what I'm doing now. Taiwan at the time, my first job when I left Caltech was for a Taiwanese company. Taiwan is all about high tech. Back in the early 2000s, they're not doing any medical tech or biochemistry, biophysics. They're not doing pharmaceutical. And so it was the only area I could go into. And actually, it's a lot easier, surprisingly. You can easily learn to code in high school. You can't learn to cure cancer in high school. It's impossible.
You're also the oldest boy. You had 6 younger brothers?
Yes, I have 6 younger brothers. So I have 2 full brothers.
Dude, I didn't know that.
2 full brothers, 2 half brothers, and 2 stepbrothers. So my parents divorced and both of them remarried. And it's interesting. They both told me never to to marry a Caucasian. Like they're like, don't marry an American. And then they both did, which is fine. Yeah, they gave me a lot of pressure. And then in the end, I guess it's just statistics where they're living. It was bound to happen. So I have 2 full brothers, 2 half brothers, and 2 stepbrothers. And so while I'm 45, I still have 2 brothers in college.
When you were growing up as well, you actually left the house pretty early because you went to boarding school.
Yes, I know boarding school sounds horrible to some people, but if you have tiger parents and divorced parents who still hold grudges against each other, it's much easier and much more fun to be sent to boarding school where, while it's tough and very structured, your teachers are fair. Your parents, if they have a bad day, they are definitely not fair. If they got an argument at work, they're going to have an argument with you when they get home. And so going off to boarding school was actually an awesome experience for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
What was boarding school like for you? Because you said you're like the only Asian kid, right, in boarding school?
I think there were 2 or 3 others, but yeah, pretty much no different than living in Ohio or Virginia. And yeah, I went to a boarding school called Woodbury Forest, and my 2 full brothers also went to boarding schools near Niagara Falls in Canada, a city called St. Catharines. But yeah, it was kind of like pre-college. You live in a dorm, you have roommates, you pretty much can make all your own decisions within a framework. So there's lights out at a certain time. You have to get up at a certain time, eat at certain times. You're required to do sports, things like that. But yeah, I would say when my parents said they're going to send me to boarding school, I was like, hell no. But within a week, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was just a great decision. And also in boarding school, that's where I met the majority of my TAS friends, Taipei American School. I met a lot of them during that time, and they're still friends today. So yeah, it was a great experience. I definitely encourage it. You can afford it. My brother's actually having that discussion with his wife right now. His son is about to enter high school, and he's debating if he should spend, $60,000 a year sending his kid to boarding school. The first of 3.
What would you say to a parent? What did their kids get out of it? What did you learn from boarding school?
Definitely independence. Starting at 14 years old, you don't have your parents anymore. You definitely learn some sort of independence. You don't learn to manage money very well because when you're in boarding school, anything you want, you just sign for it and it's there. Oh, I want to go skiing in the Poconos this weekend, sign. Oh, I want a new tracksuit, sign. Like, yeah, the money thing, it doesn't teach you that well, but definitely structure, getting along with other people, socializing. You can't be shy and be in boarding school. It was kind of a nightmare for my brother because in boarding school, you don't have individual showers. It's like a locker room. And so you're basically like in this huge shower room with a bunch of guys. And I was fine, but some people can't adjust to that very well. Also, not unlike fraternity, there is some hazing. I went to an all boys school. So different experience. My brothers went to co-ed schools. So there's definitely a bit of hazing. If you have a certain personality, you're fine. If you don't, you probably won't thrive. So my recommendation as someone who went and knowing a lot of people that went is there are certain kids that would do fine and do well, and probably some that it's not for them. And it's really an individual choice for parents. But, talking to Gil and talking to other friends, everyone wants what's best for their kids to what they can afford tuition wise. For me, I would probably definitely send my kids to boarding school. One thing it did is definitely make me more worldly. If I was to stay in Ohio, nothing wrong with staying in Ohio. It's a wonderful place, but people tend to just stay in their hometown where they are, unless they happen to go into tech and go to San Francisco, Bay Area, or Austin or something like that. But it makes you more worldly. You have friends from every corner of the planet, different cultures, different languages, things like that. And some of the downsides, you are definitely around wealthier people. No offense to those wealthy people, but they definitely don't live in the real world, especially the uber wealthy people. And this is not a blanket statement. Some of them are very down to earth, but most of them are not. And when you're 14, 15, 16, you don't understand why all your friends have Mercedes SLs and you only have a C-Class. It's just like, oh, daddy, you don't love me. Like there is like a skewed perception of money.
But C-Class is still a very nice car. Just to put things in perspective.
No, I know that. My dad was a doctor. He's not like some sort of gazillionaire. But the people that go to boarding schools also include very extremely wealthy people, a lot of politicians' kids. I did have lunch with Oliver North once because his son went to my high school. That was interesting. But yeah, your kids will basically be around country club kids, which I think that's not a great thing because they have a skewed sense of money and they think the whole world is like peachy and just country club lifestyle, which it's not. And when I went to Berkeley, that was like very eye-opening that I actually never visited the Berkeley campus before I went. And I'd never seen so many homeless people growing up in Ohio. It's not dirty. There's no urban decay, things like that. And so you're definitely shielding your kids away from that. But overall, I feel like if your kid is going to do well, he's going to do well wherever he goes. If he's not as, scholastically great or not good in school, it gives them a leg up. You have a advantage over your peers. Fair or unfair, it's definitely not fair. It's no different than your parents being able to afford the best. Well, I guess they got rid of SAT, but if you have the best SAT tutors and you have a lot of after school tutoring, of course, you're going to do better and get into better schools. That's a whole different conversation and that, different social equity. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that, but if you're a parent, you're going to take advantage of that. That's just a fact.
Right. Yeah. So did you experience any racism, prejudice while you were in Virginia? And then how did that then carry over or translate once you got to Berkeley?
Okay. So going through different areas I've lived in. So when I lived in Canada, I was too young to know. Ohio, kids are mean, right? There's no other Asian people in your class. The nicest thing is they call you Oriental. In general, kids will be like, oh, you have a flat nose or you have pointy eyes. You're like different. And I definitely did hear some kind of children's racist remarks, but they're children. They don't know any better. Going to Virginia and I guess being part of the quote unquote model minority, the racism I saw was much more directed at African Americans. There were stereotypes. People probably thought I knew Kung Fu and was really good at math. One of those was true. But in general, no, I found the people in Virginia like very courteous, very nice. I'm trying to think of the term for it, but it's not looked down, a little condescending, like you're not like a regular American or white American. It was kind of like you're not the same as us, but that's okay because you're Asian. But definitely there is racism against African Americans at a whole nother level. I actually, strangely enough, I've heard the most racism in my life when I moved to California, like on the street, like people yelling, things like that. That never happened in Virginia. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because in Virginia, nowadays you do, but back then you didn't see that many Asian people. There wasn't this sense that they're taking over your country or those things. I think nowadays, there's of course a lot of anti-China rhetoric going on. And there's this sense that people from China are extremely wealthy and buying up everything. And so maybe that's why I definitely felt more racism in California than I ever did in Ohio or Virginia. And infinitely more, which probably might surprise people.
You actually left the house when you're pretty young, at a younger age than most. I'd imagine that your relationship with your parents was probably not as deep as other people growing up. You mentioned earlier in this interview that your father passed away or had cancer. And so can you talk a little bit about your relationship with your dad when that was going on?
My dad is a person who excelled in life, excelled in school, but emotionally vacant. Probably like a lot of Asian dads, except he was super coddled as a child. And so never admits he's wrong. He also had somewhat of a frat boy mentality because he was in a frat. Yeah. So he was pretty tough on us as kids, both academically and I don't know how many dads talk smack when they play sports, but my dad definitely did. And that kind of drove me, but it definitely to some of my brothers did not. They aren't the same type of people that I am. I playing basketball. My dad would he's on like a Jordan level of talking smack on the court. And I loved it, but it didn't work well with one of my brothers who's more sensitive and it kind of just lowered his confidence in everything. Yeah. My relationship with my dad was kind of like, I wouldn't say it's like a friend. He only came to me for straight up advice. Like, what specs should I get on my car? How do I fix this thing? It's very technical things because I was always good in school. A lot of my dad rubbed off on me. I was always very good in school. And so I thought I was entitled to do everything I wanted to in life. My brothers didn't get the perfect grades I did. And so they were never allowed to get away with what I got away with. Yeah, my relationship with my dad was definitely, I wouldn't call it was warm at times, but not warm. It was very practical. My younger brother probably had a very different experience than me because people would say I'm very much like my dad. So I don't concede anything. I don't, I don't, I actually had a big fight with my dad my first year in college, and he would offer like, oh, if you don't do what I say, then I'm not paying for your college. So I actually didn't take a penny from my dad after I went to college, and not because I wanted to pay for it and not because I wanted to help my dad out, but out of pure pride. He said that. I'm like, forget it. I'm not taking another dime from you. And I never did. And I held that grudge for a long time. While my brothers were kind of coasting along, getting every car they want, getting all the spending money they want, I took a lot of student loans and got scholarships and things like that. In the long run, it really taught me what hard work was, being more penny pinching. I mean, I would say I'm pretty thrifty. I don't like to waste money at all. Maybe that's why I'm investing now. But I would say my relationship with my dad was very professional. But after he caught cancer, he eased up a lot. His life perspective changed. And I would say the years that he was going through his cancer treatments were pretty horrible, but I probably talked to him most during that time. And my dad is famous for making very calm, cutting remarks at people where he doesn't seem like he's being aggressive, but he's cutting you down a lot. When he caught cancer and was going through treatments, that definitely abated a lot. And I remember I was driving to one of his chemotherapy sessions, and I was like, you've been much nicer. I just feel like your perspective has changed. And he was like, it actually hasn't changed, but the chemo has affected my brain. And when the comeback comes to my head, that moment is already past. And so it's like, I can't use it anymore. But my dad thought he was very witty, and he was, but he was also very mean. And so that time period when he had cancer, it was good. I got to talk to him a lot. And that's when I realized, I used to look at my parents like a lot of us do, like they're superhuman, infallible, they can't make mistakes. And that's when I found out all parents are just winging it and they're just doing the best they can. They don't know what they're doing. I found out a lot of times that he yelled at us and was mad. Behind closed doors, he was just cracking up that we were so scared and things like that. But yeah, so those last years with my dad, they're probably that I got to know him the best. And unfortunately, kind of like Will, my dad, both my parents don't drink at all. And so I never really had a beer with my dad or enjoyed that type of setting. But yeah, those years were great. I got to know him much better.
Did you evolve how you approached your dad at all? Or, was it always just professional and you didn't have to? It was just life events that would change how you interacted?
I mean, of course, when I was a child, I was very close to my dad because I'm like 7, right? It was more when I got older. I think it was also a function of my parents' like awful divorce. They were at odds like crazy. Like any parents who are contemplating divorce or go through divorce, definitely leave your kids out of it. Like it is very, very hard on kids to go through divorce. And my parents, especially my dad, did not leave us out of it. We were basically like a weaponization of the fight between my parents. And, they're human. They're going through pain too. They're going through, like one of our FF pledge guys, Shane, went through a divorce. It's hard. I can't even imagine what it's like to go through that. And so I don't blame my parents, but it is definitely very tough on the kids. And so I think my relationship with my parents, especially my dad, was severely affected by that. And what's funny is like on that same drive to his chemotherapy, I brought up like all the terrible things he did when he was going through that divorce. And I'm like 7 years old. And he was like, I didn't do that. That's crazy. Why would I do that? I'm like, no, seriously, you can ask my brothers. That definitely happened. He's like, no, that's crazy. I would never do that. I'm like, they have selective amnesia. He blamed the chemo. I don't know if it's true, but I guess when you're going through that type of a divorce, you're just in that fog of war. And I genuinely believe my dad doesn't remember like the things he did during that time, but It is very memorable for me. I would say it was definitely, it left a mark and it's very horrible. Maybe that's why I got married at 44 years old. I don't know.
It sounds like the mental toughness that you've had to have your entire life, whether it's growing up with such high achieving parents and being forced to be such high achieving, to sent to boarding school where you're around all these super rich kids, to going to Caltech and Berkeley and studying research. And now one of the things that I think you're really good at is building relationships and getting to know people. And we talk about what you're doing in Taiwan right now and doing BD between the government, with companies, with startups. And I think that's all amazing. When did you pick up those skills in terms of navigating people and learning how to build relationships? Have you always had it your entire life?
Oh, definitely no. I will tell you that I was definitely more on the shy side when I was in elementary school, middle school, high school. It's definitely, maybe it was in me, but I didn't feel like I was in a setting where I could let that. Asian Americans that grew up in cities like Los Angeles, where there's tons of other Asian Americans, they don't feel as much like minorities. They don't feel as much as like outsiders. I think a function of growing up in Ohio probably made me feel a little bit like different than other people. And I wasn't as confident. And so I think going to boarding school definitely helped me find my voice outside my immediate family and friends and be more independent. But Berkeley's probably really where I found more of a voice, where I felt like, oh, there's more people like me. Funny story though, when my first week on the dorms in Berkeley, everybody was meeting each other, talking about where they're from, everyone speaking English. And one of the guys turned to me and asked me in Chinese, like, how long have you been in this country? Well, I was like, what? He's like, you're definitely not from here. I was like, I'm from Ohio, man. I'm more American than you. But I was just very different than an Asian American who grew up in California. And I spoke differently and just carried myself differently. But yeah, Berkeley is definitely a place I found my voice. You go to a place like Caltech, you can't be quiet. Everyone there is super alpha, super smart, and trying to prove themselves. That also was a place that developed me. And then it was just practice. Once I got in my groove, I've always just wanted to be around people. I'm an extreme extrovert. The Myers-Briggs test, my extrovert is 100%. I feed off of other people. Probably the reason why COVID in LA just put me into depression and just I couldn't take it anymore and I had to leave to Taiwan. I don't know if people's personalities change over time because I definitely wasn't extroverted when I was younger, or maybe it was just my situation, but just, yeah, a lot of meeting people and feeding off other people. I feel like I'm pretty good at reading people and vibing off other people, but it definitely didn't start that way. I would say I was probably the complete opposite. And yeah, nowadays I feel like I have a knack for it. I don't know why.
Yeah, you're amazing at it. The Venn diagram between the people you know and the people I know, my Venn diagram is inside your Venn diagram.
But the other thing is you have to realize I'm 10 years older than you. And so I've had 10 more years to meet people, and you meet people from other people. So it's a parabolic growth. As you meet more people, you meet even more people. Just joining FF, that wasn't like 1-to-1, 1-to-2. That's 1 to like hundreds. And so when you join a lot of organizations, when you participate in a lot of community things, the number of people you meet just rises exponentially.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was nonprofits. So I'm not really that familiar with nonprofits, and you're on the board of so many. Why are you on the board of so many? And what is it that you get out of it?
There's definitely a level of self-fulfillment, gratification. You're in your 30s. Nonprofit and donations are not part of your life yet. But whether you have children and are donating to the bake sale, or you're just on your own, and as you get older, you want to do more fulfilling things. And you have more money to do so, and you have more connections to do so. When you're 25, you don't know a lot of people. You can't get a lot done. You're basically like a worker bee. But as you get older, you just know more people. You know the right person to contact, and you can get a lot more done. That first Taiwanese organization I joined, TAP, I actually used to hang out with them back when I was in my 20s. I know a lot of their early people. My best friend was in it, but I only went to their parties. Fast forward 20 years later, when I'm now like easily the oldest person there, they need help networking, they need help raising money, and they need help accomplishing things that they want to do. Like one of the big things they do is the census. Every 10 years, they try to get Taiwanese Americans to write Taiwanese in the census. That's very difficult for a 25-year-old to do because he has to worry about his job. He doesn't have time freedom because he has to report to work. He can't leave anytime he wants. He doesn't have the network and he doesn't have a lot of wealthy friends who can donate, or even if they're wealthy, they won't donate. When you hit around in your mid 40s, you're much more effective at doing those things. It comes easy. Connecting nonprofits with wealthy individuals is not difficult for me at all because I have that network, but it's very difficult for someone who's 25. The other thing is you try to find more meaning when you're older. And I'm probably reaching the last 2 decades of my career. And I just wanted to find ways to give back, pay it forward. A lot of people, when they're in their 20s and 30s, this is not the focus of their life. But as you get older, you need to find more meaning in your life. And community service is definitely a way to pay it forward and give back. And it just makes you feel good, like helping people out. I just happened to choose, something that was very Taiwan centric, but whether it's Taiwan centric, API centric, or just mainstream organization, it's very, very fulfilling and they need your help.
As you were joining the different organizations, how did, your first approach, what were you thinking? And then as you joined more and more, what did you learn? What fulfills you in a different way? And what's your mindset now going into new organizations or existing ones, right? How do you think about it?
So what I've definitely learned is, a lot of people join organizations, especially like Chamber or Rotary, those type of things to network and to further their careers. If you do real estate, you do insurance, you do banking, they're all over nonprofits, just trying to sell their services. And this is like a complete waste of time and wrong way to look at things. When I attend these different nonprofits, we don't want to talk to you because you sell the best insurance plan. You should be there definitely to contribute, to help the community, to accomplish something outside of yourself and your family. And then if you happen to do insurance, I'm going to do it with you. I've brought plenty of people to different organization events and they're like, I don't understand why I should be here. Am I going to sell something here? Am I going to get a commission here? And I'm like, look at every person on stage at this nonprofit. Every person on stage is a millionaire. Every person here is very successful. There is a reason to be here, but they're going to smell someone with kind of ulterior motives right away. And so don't come to a nonprofit to further your career. Furthering your career should be a byproduct, right? I mean, let's be real, whether it's real estate or insurance or banking, the premiums are pretty similar across different, businesses. Everything's pretty much the same. One of my really good friends who was actually a groomsman at my wedding and he signed my marriage certificate. I met him at an Asian Business League event in Little Tokyo. It was literally one of the most boring events I've ever been to. I was dying and nothing against the Asian Business League, but after about an hour, I'm losing my attention. And this guy, Japanese American's like, hey, do you guys want to go to Bar Bar down the street, have some whiskey, let's bounce? And long story short, he became one of my best friends. And those in-between moments at organizational events are what's meaningful. The nonprofits are more about the personal relationships you make and the consistency that you attend. And you don't attend because you're trying to network, and you don't attend because you're trying to get that commission or that sale. You attend because you're trying to contribute. You're trying to make relationships. And I didn't contribute anything to Asian Business League, but I made one of the best friends I ever had in my life because we were at that meeting. And so those in-between moments, whether you're going to the bathroom or it's intermission or whatever, that's your time to meet people. And some people you'll vibe with and some people you won't, but you're not there just to sell your product. You're there to build relationships. And what you do is a byproduct. Of course, when my friend's like, hey, I'll give you all the same. He owns a G. Mori insurance company in Little Tokyo in LA. He's like, hey, our premiums are about the same. We'll give you the same things, but I will buy you a bottle of whiskey at $7,000 and it'll always be there for you. When it runs out, just let me know and we'll go. And so that's how you build a relationship. And you had all of my insurance ever since. And so if you want to get involved in nonprofits, don't do it because you want to sell. It's a byproduct. Like, do it to meet the people, to make the relationships, to be part of the community. And then everything else will just fall into place because we could smell it a mile away. And it's really funny to meet like a 22-year-old who joins, a chamber event trying to sell life insurance. It's adorable, but yeah, it doesn't work that way. You have to play the long game, build a relationship. It doesn't take months, it's years. But when that opportunity comes up and you're like, hey, I need life insurance, I'm going to talk to that guy because he's my friend and I see him all the time.
That consistency, I can definitely see it based on your actions. Every time I talk to you or see you, you're going to 2 or 3 events a night. You're always going to attend all these nonprofits. Pretty cool to see. Can you explain what the associate advisor of the Overseas Community Affairs Council of the Republic of China is?
Okay, so this is a ministerial level department of the Republic of China, Taiwan. So this is the equivalent of a Ministry of Culture, a Ministry of Science and Technology, a Ministry of Economics, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's like the State Department. They handle foreign countries, their relationships. OCAC, Overseas Community Affairs Council, formerly known as the Overseas Chinese Affairs Council, their job is to interact with overseas Taiwanese and Chinese abroad. So this organization has been around even when my parents were children before. And their job is to interact with Taiwanese Chinese diaspora. And so when you go to Chinatown in LA, I don't know if you noticed, but there's Taiwan ROC flags flying everywhere. They celebrate Double 10 every year. And so the Overseas Community Affairs Council's job is to the interface between the diaspora and Taiwan. And they're also the organization that ran the Love Boat program, which sadly I wasn't a part of, but I heard great things about it. Judy Chu, our congresswoman, Elaine Chao, our former Secretary of Transportation, and a lot of very famous people like Clifton Chang. They were all part of the Love Boat program. And so this is a soft power to keep a connection between diaspora and ROC Taiwan. And so when you're very involved in the community and trying to link not just Taiwanese Americans, but also Chinese Americans, especially the people in Chinatown, with Taiwan, you are bestowed this honor of being an advisor. And there's 4 levels. Kenny Yi, who's the president of the Yi Family Association Taiwan, is also an advisor for OCAC. So both of us are on the lower rung. There's 4 tiers. The highest tier is a commissioner. These are tiers of like honor and respect. Commissioners get to meet with like President Tsai regularly. They get to take a big role in the community, but it's also different tiers of donations. So like the higher you are, the more money you have to give. But yeah, I've actually been talking to Kenny about maybe doing some sort of, so OCAC not only Love Boat, but they sponsor trips between different organizations overseas to come to Taiwan and explore what they want to explore. So if you're part of, let's say, a film organization or a cultural organization, you can come to Taiwan. The Ministry of Culture will show you like things to do with film, cultural things here, and bridge that connection. The Taiwanese American Chamber, they come to Taiwan all the time, sponsored trips by the government to find ways to do business in Taiwan or bring Taiwanese business to the United States. And so I've been talking with Kenny to maybe have a delegation from FF, which can come to Taiwan and learn more about ways we could work together, whether it's economic, cultural, or other things. And so the role of the OCAC is to connect with diaspora, both Chinese and Taiwanese.
You're the president-elect of the Alhambra Chamber of Commerce. Can you explain what the Chamber of Commerce is and why you became the president-elect?
So chambers of commerce are to promote business, to promote commerce, tax generating activity in a city. I was brought into the Alhambra Chamber by a gentleman named Stan Yanamoto, who's now retired. And he was just a very good salesman and sold me. So my business was in Alhambra. I got in, but I wanted to not represent my business. I wanted to represent Taiwan and our identity, our country in that context. So I joined the Alhambra Chamber as a representative of TAP. And that was just to let people know Alhambra is probably 50% Asian American and a significant number of Taiwanese in that area. And so I wanted to let the mainstream audience, let the people on the board know that Taiwanese Americans are active in the community and wanting to make, contributions. So that was my impetus for joining the chamber. And then whenever I join organizations, whether it's the chamber, whether it's TAP or the Taiwanese Center or Taiwan Center or Taiwan United Fund or FF, I tend to go overboard. Like, I don't join just to put it on my resume. I want to make changes. If I have a seat at the table, I tend to make noise. Sometimes, I should probably sit back and observe more, but I want to make a difference. And so I joined the chamber to represent Taiwanese interests, but also represent business interests. The more I was on the chamber, I found out not only do Taiwanese Americans own a ton of property in Alhambra, but there's low representation of APIs in general. And so I just wanted to be an advocate of voice. A couple of years ago, there was actually a movement to a proposal to ban gas appliances in Alhambra. I don't know if you know this, but cooking Chinese food without gas is just impossible. And most people go to Alhambra to eat Asian food, right? That's car dealerships and Asian food. But if there's no one representing the community, no one's going to know this. And maybe it might pass. They'll have a vote. And suddenly everyone will be replacing all their appliances with electric and cooking terrible food. And so I joined the chamber to represent interests of my community because there's not many people there. And then a little soft power for Taiwan. And I tended to be very active and go to a lot of things. And suddenly I was attending an executive board meeting and everyone was there, a few people not there. And they were like, we need to have a president-elect who has never been president before. And I noticed everyone in the room had been president before. And those who hadn't didn't attend the meeting. It's a huge honor, but it's also a huge responsibility because I don't want to just have it in title. I want to affect change and do something worthwhile and effective for the business owners in Alhambra. So basically, just through a lot of participation, a lot of advocacy, a lot of getting yelled at by various interest groups in the city, I ended up being the president-elect. I didn't think this would happen until I was more gray hair, and I hope I can at least be effective in some way. But yeah, I'm very honored to get that title.
I love how giving that I've seen like Taiwanese people are. And so, but being in New York, I'd love your advice on your favorite kind of New York Taiwanese associations, if any stand out to you.
So of course, I'm like a big part of TAP, Taiwanese American Professional. They have a New York chapter. Every chapter has their nuance, kind of what they're famous for. TAP New York, when we have a national convention, they're the ones who roll in limousines. They buy bottles. They have the biggest table of the club.
Wait, really? I literally know them just they're like flag football. So this is very strange to me. But
well, it depends on what era, right? Like who their president is, what he likes to do. In my era, I really enjoyed social events. So we had a lot of social events. If you have a president that likes more internal type of board outings, likes to go hiking, it'll be more like that. Notoriously, at one of our conventions, TAP New York gave subscriptions to Pornhub as their gift to like another chapter. It was not amusing because there are children's camps that also attend, but at least to the president. But it just tells you New York is different than all the other chapters.
Got it.
But they are more social. They do a lot of party, things like that. The Taiwanese American Chamber has a chapter in New York. So for those that don't know, TAP and the chamber are, the way they're differing is TAP is more like second gen Taiwanese Americans, while the chamber tends to be more first gen. Like all their meetings are run in Chinese. Their notes are in Chinese. That's changing a little bit now as we're entering like fourth gen Taiwanese Americans. but they definitely have a lot of resources and are very influential politically and economically. And so they're also a very good organization to get with. I am a member of the Taiwanese Chamber, not a board member, but yeah, they're also good. But yeah, just, I can't tell you what you'll like. You just have to go and see how the people are, because I've definitely been to generations of some organizations where they're great, and then generations where I don't vibe with them at all. So it's more about the people.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it's beautiful because you were also talking about the in-between moments, right? So it's not like it's the vibe, and then just it's what comes with it, right? Like you're committed and you're giving. So
don't force yourself into any organization, right? Like you have to feel like it's right for you, some sort of sense of belonging, and you enjoy it. There was a time I'd walk into like when you're in an organization, you have to attend other organizations' events, all these galas, all these banquets, and I would feel lost. I don't know anyone inside there. Taiwanese Lions Club in LA. I didn't know anyone at one time. Now every uncle, like, hey, Chris, what's up? Like, yeah, there was one year I told my wife, I'm going to attend a Taiwanese, like, not old, but more advanced age organization banquet on July 4th. And I was like, yeah, it'll be fun. Like, it'll be totally better than going to watch fireworks with you. Because I kind of felt like a connection with these people, because they all just waved to me and say, yeah, there's a certain point where you start to, at first I didn't know anyone, and then suddenly I knew everyone, because they just appreciated that you're there. And, this is not just Taiwanese organization, not just API organization, every organization, nonprofit, is going through a transition where a lot of people are advancing their age and they're looking for someone to hand it off to. A great example is the Taiwan Center in Rosemead in LA. They're an umbrella organization for 74 other Taiwanese organizations. They're constructing a new facility that will have meeting rooms. It'll have retail. It'll have residential. They're doing all of this so that they can provide some revenue for the people, the younger people who take over, have residual income so that they can run the organization. Initially, I didn't want any part of it because it's mostly older people. It's not fun in how I look at organizations. But their president, Paul Chen, told me, like, hey, we're leaving this for the younger generation. We're trying to get more younger generation people involved. And this is our legacy. And we need people to help transition to that next era. And so that convinced me to join their board. I feel like we all need to get involved in our community somehow, because all these people worked really hard to build these organizations, and they did it for a reason. And we can't let their legacy and their hard work die. I don't want to say it's ours for the taking, because not many people are into it, but it's important because we want to continue this legacy. I just got married a couple of years ago. I'm going to have a child soon. I want to leave something for my kids. I know you guys are all in your 30s, but as you progress in your careers and your lives, I ask you, take part in something in the community. Take part in something bigger than yourself, because there is a huge vacuum and a need. And it doesn't need to be Taiwanese. It can be anything, but just do something to pay it forward for our children for the future.
Cool. Chris, thank you so much for your time. This was amazing. Really appreciate it.
I hope it was interesting. I felt like I talked a lot about myself, but I guess that's because you're interviewing me. I don't really talk about myself so much.
No, that was the point, and you did a really good job. Thank you for being so vulnerable with us, and I actually learned a lot.
Yeah. I got to say that we haven't known each other that long, but today I learned a lot more. I've never actually heard you speak so seriously, even though we've had numerous conversations about business and things in different arenas. But I think the way that you broke things down and talked about your thoughts around a lot of things, I think I learned a lot, and it's definitely a treat to have you on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for making it to the end of the episode. You can find show notes, links, and contact info for us and our guests at our website, willandlee.show. We love feedback, so please feel free to drop us a note with any thoughts or suggestions. Lastly, if you like what you heard, we'd really appreciate you adding ratings to our episodes. Thanks for listening. Until next time.